Hello and welcome to the Blues Kind Show, the show for kind blues. Today I'm continuing my list series. We're looking at the levers, the cut, the rumours and my overall view. If you've seen my content before, you know I one take everything. I might change it in the future, but for now that's my approach. And given there's a lot of meat on the bones, I'm going to see if I can get this done in 20 minutes or less. I'm starting with our blonde friend Tom De Koning, who is obviously off to the Saints on a rumoured $1.8 million a year for 8 years. Carlton had apparently offered him a 7-year deal worth $1.1 million a year. So a substantial enough difference that I think you could reasonably assume that's the main reason for him having left. And I hold no grudge to that, and I also don't really think it reflects on Carlton a lot. Personally, I've always been in the camp of wanting Tom to go once I'd heard the numbers thrown around. I believe it was in the pre-season or maybe very early in the year, but I do believe it was actually before the season had even started properly, that St Kilda were rumoured to be offering at least 600 grand per year more than what Carlton were offering. And for mine, that was a good enough reason to say, all right, it's been great, but I don't want to invest that heavily into a ruckman. So even 1.1 a year I thought was too much for the guy. But here we are. I don't believe in paying ruckman a lot. I think history bears out that having a really top-end, high-priced ruckman doesn't necessarily guarantee you a heck of a lot of success. I think when you look back since the year 2000, there's only been 4 teams that have had an All-Australian ruckman in their premiership team. And that includes Brendan Lade in 2004, Dean Cox in 2006, Brad Ottens in 2007, and Max Gawn in 2021. And there's also a number of examples of, frankly, battlers who showed up an All-Australian ruckman in the grand final. So last year's a great example with Darcy Fort, I would say, besting Brodie Grundy. Now, Sydney got slaughtered altogether, but, that's quite a large disparity there, especially in the money allocated at that position. Scott Lysette versus Grundy again, I'm noticing a slight pattern, but in 2018, because Nick Nat was obviously injured for the Eagles when they won the flag. Ben McAvoy, who was a good ruckman, not exceptional, did really well against Nat Nui in the 2015 grand final. Bailey for Hawthorn against Sandilands in 2013. And honestly, that's as far back as I went. This is not an exhaustive list. I went back to 2013 and found 4 examples and thought, I think that sort of illustrates the point pretty well. Ultimately, Tom left in large part because of the money. I think that doesn't really reflect all that poorly on the club. I think that he's also demonstrated being a really positive contributor to the club and liking the club, and therefore me assuming that the money does play such a large role, not him hating the club. There was photos in the last week of the season of him at Banner Night, helping the cheer squad out there, or being at the AFLW front and centre. And that's different than even the next guy I'm going to talk about. So I think that does actually say good things about us, and even him. I think it says really good things about Tom. So look, they're getting a good one. However, for us, who I care about the most, Carlton, we save $1.1 million a year, which is what we'd set aside, and we'll get a first-round compensatory pick for him, which will be in the top 10. And I've got to be honest, I think replacing his play from this season, not that difficult. He had his worst season in, 2 or 3 years. And I think that getting a replacement level ruckman to do as well as him, I think Pitto could easily do as well as Tom did this year. So in terms of us trying to become a better team again, we don't have to replace Tom at his best in order to do better than we did this year, if that makes sense. But Tom, all the best, but I'm definitely not disappointed that he's off. Speaking of people that I'm not disappointed that they're off, I've done a video on Jack Silvani before, And I said it pretty plainly then that I don't think it's a massive loss. Some things that I'd said was that he'd had a really good start to the year, but at the time of making that video, he'd missed a third of the season. He ended up missing half the season. He played 13 games of a possible 23, so played just over half of the games. He played 128 games in his time at Carlton in 8 seasons, averaging about 14 games a year. I wouldn't say this is someone who is a cornerstone of the club in anything outside of, appearance and potential, a bit of romance and, as they say, Carlton royalty, which personally not that into myself. What we will gain is slated to be a back end of first round pick or a second rounder. The main narrative, though, that has sort of come out of this is that Carlton is getting a few slings and arrows because Jack feels he's been hard done by. Some people are saying he's not feeling the love, he's not appreciated enough. I think it's pretty clear that that is coming from either Jack or people close to Jack, and I think that's not necessarily a reflection of his time at Carlton. If you want a longer explanation than what I'm about to give, go back and give my old video on Jack a look. But a few things that I want to sort of touch on is, I said it then, I still think it now. Romance is only real if it's wanted by all parties. If Jack isn't into it anymore, then I'm very happy for him to move on. The legacy's great, but if he doesn't want to uphold it, that's also fine. No one should be pressured into keeping a job just because their dad and their granddad had a specific job. If he wants to go and do something different, or at least do the same job but at a different place, he's more than welcome to. And I don't think that he should have been pressured into staying. I definitely don't think that Jack has been slighted since coming to Carlton either. He came as a forward, which is something that people always seem to gloss over. He played his juniors as a forward. So we didn't play him in the forward line for a laugh, but he did struggle to bed down a spot given we had two superior players of the same age came through at the same time in Harry and Charlie. The last 2 seasons, which has been his entire last contract, he's played 13 games. He missed all of 2024 with injury, not having a go at him for being injured, but again, not a cornerstone player. The 13 games he played at the start of this year was the best run of form he's had in his entire career. It took him 8 years. Again, I'm not having a go at the... Actually, no, pardon me. I keep saying 8 years. It's taken him 10 years. He was drafted in 2015. I apologise for that mistake. It's taken him 10 years to bed down a spot. And one thing that I think gets overlooked is, sure, he's been a really nice number 2. He got to be the number 2 to Jacob Wiedering. Wieders did not have his best season. I think a bit of that can be explained by how the rest of the team went. He also had some injury stuff through the middle of the year. But getting to play the number 2 to a really good fullback, I think that can help to make you look better. Also, all the discussion of Jack being a wonderful kick. Yeah, his kicking was really good this year. We've seen a lot of players who aren't great kicks, who were forwards, move to the back line and magically their kicking improves. It's almost like the kicks they have to take are much easier. Jack also had a little bit of a case of the cement hands early in his career. Funnily enough, he's been regarded as a much better mark. It's a lot easier to mark the ball going back with it than having to lead up at it. So I'm not saying that Jack didn't play well when he did play this year, but I would suggest there are some factors that indicate maybe he's benefiting from the role he's getting to play, as well as he did play it. I don't want to take anything away from him, but I'm not going to also pretend like he's the new Jeremy McGovern. So, what I hope is that he goes to St Kilda on the rumoured 800 grand per year for 5 years that has been offered not by his dad. Believe that if you want. I don't really care. Like St Kilda have put out that Silvani sits out of those list meetings. Sorry, I should be more clear. That Stephen sits out of the list meetings when his son's been discussed. I don't really care either way. I want him to take that deal because it's the biggest one that's been reported, and it means that we'd get the highest possible compensation. If it's 800 for 5, I'd imagine we get a back end of first round pick. Sam Edmonds said it might be as high as 900 a year for 5 years. I think that could mean we get just a first round pick, a regular first round pick, the equivalent of what we're getting for De Koning. Either way, I'd be wrapped. I think for a guy that, again, averages 14 games for his per year for his entire career, getting any sort of first round pick as compensation is wonderful. Additionally, I think that replacing a second tall defender, when they get to play next to Weeders, I think that is something you can do a lot more cheaply than what we've offered Jack. We apparently offered Jack about $650 to $700 a year. I would be looking at a guy like Ethan Phillips, who just won our VFL Best and Fairest, 197 centimetre key back, started his career at Hawthorn, went a little bit, into the wilderness, has come back really, really well. He's 26, I believe, so he's largely ready to go. I also have no issues with Lewis Young, not long term, but, just for 2026, just to keep it ticking over. And we've also been linked to a guy like Buku Karmas, who I think, at least for depth, would be excellent. He is the same draft as Sam Walsh, so he's been around a bit. Dropped in Luke Beveridge's team. I have my own views on how Luke Beveridge handles taller players, though. So I don't really look at that in a negative light. I think there's a lot of one man's trash is another man's treasure when it comes to someone like Buku. So personally, Jack, it's been great for Tom. I don't think I'm going to say quite the same for Jack. It's been something. Don't know where you're going just yet, but I hope you have a great time. Next, I wanted to quickly touch on the guys that have been cut by us, and that's Alex Cincotta, Orazio Fantasia, and Lemmy. I'll deal with Cincotta and Orazio together. I've spoken about them previously in my small forwards video. In my view, they played the wrong position and were out of contract at the wrong time. Being small forwards that were out of contract this year, given how little production we've had out of our small forwards, was very likely to lead to these guys getting cut, especially with a guy like Frankie Evans having such an excellent finish to the season, where otherwise maybe he was a bit more vulnerable. Guys like Durden and Fogarty, who also may have been more vulnerable, are still under contract, and so I think there is just an element of bad luck, bad timing with Cincotta and Orazio. Wish them all the best. I think they played some decent footy for us, but obviously not enough to cement themselves in the side. Harry Lemmy, I'll try to touch on in about a minute or two. It was his third season at the club, and he never debuted. I think that people that watch the twos assume that Harry Lemmy was doing all of the right things, or at least not watch the twos, but people that follow the twos, look up the stats, because he did kick 31 goals from 16 games, which is good. It's just under 2 goals a game. Like, that's very solid. But this is an AFL listed player playing against VFL listed players. And if you've watched a lot of VFL, a lot of these guys are excellently skilled. The main thing that's missing is that they lack that sort of, premium either athleticism, additional height. So a lot of the time, Harry gets to play on slightly undersized players or, guys that aren't as quick as him. And he still doesn't really show a lot of presence or tenacity. And I think that might have been sort of what went against him ultimately in the end. I look at the VFL Best and Fairest results. He came third with 89 votes. But Ethan Phillips won it with 159 votes. So that's some 70 votes behind. Ethan Phillips almost doubled him. And Ethan had an excellent year, but again, he's a VFL listed player. That coming third is nice, but he played a full season there. I would have liked to see a better outcome. Not necessarily he wins the thing, but he gets a bit closer than he did. Also, having watched a lot of VFL, Again, I do feel like maybe he was a little bit stiff. I think he showed some signs, but clearly the rate of development wasn't one that they thought was worth persisting with. If they thought they would be able to get something in a trade for him, then he wouldn't have been delisted yet. But evidently, I think that they either think he won't get picked up or it'll be relatively cheaply as as a delisted free agent somewhere. Harry, wish you all the best. I hope you do continue your football career because, like I said, I think you show a lot of really nice traits. And if nothing else, I think you could be an excellent long-term VFL player. And I think that's nothing to sneeze at. It's a hell of a lot more than I ever did. So all the best, mate. And, maybe you'll pop up again somewhere else. The last thing that I wanted to touch on was Charlie. Now, I've discussed Charlie previously in a video, and a lot of sort of what's gone on, I think could take quite a long time to unpack. But I wanted to sort of give a quick snapshot of how I feel about the situation. So, multiple journos, three main ones in particular, Sam McClure, John Ralph, and Tom Morris, have all said that Charlie, in his exit interview, softly requested a trade. And the language is a little bit finicky. But what I would sort of say that I've gleaned from the situation is he hasn't demanded to be traded, but instead suggested that he's very open to the idea. I would say that it's something akin to what happened with Bryce Gibbs, which is he's happy to stay, but he would obviously be happier to leave. Now, lots has been leaked to the media from the exit interview, and something interesting about that is that the only other people in the room in an exit interview outside of Charlie are senior Carlton officials such as Michael Voss. I believe Nick Austin might have been in there, Graham Wright might have been in there. So, given they're the only people in the room, I think it's pretty likely to say that either Charlie himself or more likely his manager is leaking to the press. To be frank, I don't think this says very good things about Charlie. If you've watched my previous videos, this is not to put it all on Charlie, but I have indicated that I think that the problem with Carlton lies largely with the players. I was very happy when we kept Michael Voss because I think that basically a lot of the dissension is coming from the players maybe having a bit too much of an entitled view of their role at the club. I think Sam Walsh said it best when he said we need to have a no bullshit approach to things. And I don't know that this is the case, but I think that might have been a targeted comment at certain teammates that are doing a bit too much belly aching behind the curtains instead of worrying about what they should be, which is playing football. I'm not saying if you have grievances, you shouldn't air them, but there is obviously a fine balance in how you deal with this before it ticks over into becoming toxic. I don't think Charlie's a bad person. I don't think he's a toxic person. I do think, though, that as a senior player, either condoning or encouraging your manager leaking things like this to the media to try to put pressure on the club isn't very befitting of a guy who's, yes, a senior player, but he's also literally in the leadership group. Just to quickly go over Charlie's recent history, everyone talks about the three Colemans. Charlie signed a 6-year deal in 2022, the year he won, sorry, not 3 Colemans, 2 Colemans, what am I saying? The year that he won his first Coleman. So while he won the Coleman that year, in the 3 seasons before, he'd only played 15 games. It included missing all of 2020. He wanted the security. It's a little bit of the trend of the league that people were signing longer and longer deals, so fair enough. But he wanted the security, I would imagine, coming off 15 games in 3 seasons, including missing all of 1 season. And he got the security, which is great. But then there's one down year, truly down year, being 2025, and he decides that it's all a bit much, which I empathise with as a human, but as a Carlton supporter, I can't help but think maybe it's that sort of an attitude that would lead to the team maybe not having good enough standards, not burrowing down and pushing through and trying to work through the issues, but instead saying, I'm a high profile player with a lot of leverage. I'm going to try to exercise that leverage in order to get out of a situation that I'm finding quite uncomfortable. All the power to you if you want to do it, mate. But at the same time, I think that I can draw the inference that maybe Charlie is one of the players that might be letting our culture down a bit. This is why I don't think it necessarily reflects poorly on Vossi or other senior Carlton people outside of the players. People always say a fish rots at the head, but the head's not the same for every club. If the players have this much power at Carlton, you could argue that they are the head. Not to labour the metaphor too much more, I just can't help but look at guys like Cripps and Doherty who have had to endure so much crap, and they stuck fat and they bored through and they played good football. I thought Charlie's attitude, at least in the first half of this season, was pretty insipid. I know that he played under some duress, but I think when you compare it to, say, the last few games from Harry Mackay, let's discount the Port game where he kicked 7, things like having 10 tackles against Fremantle when he wasn't really right do show a certain standard. It shows an effort and it shows a commitment that I don't think Charlie really showed for the first 10 odd games of the season. Therefore, when people say there's a culture problem at Carlton, and what does it say about Carlton that these 3 players that I've touched on primarily today want to leave? Well, firstly, I think you can put Tom to the side. The contract offer is insane. He'd be silly not to take it, frankly, unless we were knocking on the door of winning flags. And I don't really blame him for not thinking that's the case right now. But with Jack and with Charlie, there's a saying that I'm going to give the blue version first, pardon the pun, and then I'll try to adapt it to this situation. So the blue version is, in life you'll meet jerks, but if everyone you meet is a jerk, you're the jerk. I've cleaned it up a little bit. But it can be adapted here. In life, you'll encounter problems, but if everything you encounter is a problem, you may be the problem. And that's not to say that they are problem people, but I don't think that they're suited to this situation. Charlie, from all accounts, wants a scene change because he doesn't like the bubble of living in Melbourne, or at least the bubble associated with playing for a big Melbourne club. I don't blame him for that at all. But it does mean he's probably not the right person to take us forward. I could say the same thing about Jack, more because if he thinks that he has been jerked around by the club and the club has not stuck by him again after he only played 13 games in the last 2 seasons, which was the entirety of his most recent contract, I don't think he's the sort of person that can necessarily take us forward. Just to quickly touch on Charlie and the desired compo, it's been suggested by the media, I wouldn't say reported, but suggested, that Carlton's asked for one of Sydney's main 3 midfielders of Goulden, Warner and Heaney, as well as a first-round pick. If this is the compensation, fiddling around with steak knives aside, I'd be very happy to do it. Once again, because I don't think that he's the sort of person that will take us forward if everything that's been reported is true. If you'd like a more full discussion as to why this is the case, please watch my previous video on Charlie or leave a comment and I'd be happy to cover it again in the future. My main takeaway: the sky is not falling. 1 player left after receiving a gigantic offer. The other 2 are leaving, who are, while they're very much loved by the fans, and I'm sure some of the other players, they're not without fault with regards to Carlton's culture. I therefore think moving them out, or at least them wanting to move themselves out, could lead to more unity going forward. Because if the only people who are left are the ones who want to be here, I think it makes it much easier for Vossi, Nick Austin, Graham Wright, Cripper and co to get on with the job. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a like or a subscribe. If you want to engage, push back on anything I've said, agree, disagree, give me some ideas for videos, feel free to leave a comment. As always, go Blues.